one way or the other.
We are 50-50
It's
in
literally
everything.
split.
Well, like everywhere. What would you like?
Okay, we're live.
Welcome to the cell phone committee meeting on Monday, February 10th. If you don't mind, we'll introduce ourselves and we'll start with you, Laura.
With me?
Yes. wrong
I'm
person.
Kristen.
Thank you,
Damon.
Kristen.
I am a parent.
Rita Kieser, and I am an elementary teacher.
Angela Hardy, Director of Curriculum.
Beth Brooker, high school social worker and parent.
And I'm Jared Dumas. I'm a high school teacher.
And I'm Carrie McGuire, Director of Technology.
And members aren't able to make it today are Megan Carlson, Alyssa Tracy, Sage Scully, Kira Blodgett, Sarah Sims, and Patricia Hopkins. But they'll have access to all this information. I will make sure they have everything. So today, our goal is to review the results of the surveys sent to the middle school and high school students, to the staff, and to the 6 through 12 families. So if anyone's online, it's going to be fairly quiet in here because we're going to be breaking into groups of 1 or 2 and looking at the survey results. I'll give you a few prompts for that, and then we'll report out what we noticed. Everyone in this group will have access to all the survey information also after this. And then we'll have a discussion on what our next steps might be. Was there any clear pattern? Was there a sort of a call or a guidance that was framed up by the way the feedback came to us? And what else might be helpful in making a decision? And then we'll be closing out and we'll come back together, I think at the beginning of March, the second week of March. Any questions on that? Okay, so the cell phone survey was used in a Google form, so they're all set up the same way. The only part you don't have is the introduction that came on the survey. So that just said like, what is the purpose of this survey? If you want to learn more information about cell phone and smartwatch use and what's going on, we provided 2 or 3 different articles and 2 videos, one shorter one longer one. Some of the articles had opposing viewpoints in them as well, or diverse viewpoints. And then said sort of the time frame. For middle school students, they did it, I think, in an extended homeroom block. High school students did it in an extended advisory block. Staff were provided information and some time to do it. And then families, theirs was sent out actually the first. The families got theirs first, then staff, and then the students. Our response rate for staff was, our response rate for staff was 86. Our response rate for families was 196. For high school students was 368. That's pretty good. And for middle school students, 314. So pretty good responses on the student side. The staff side is pretty good actually. And then the family side is probably one of the higher response rates we've gotten for only having a middle and high school audience, 196. So I feel like in terms of response rate, we got people that were passionate probably on one end or the other. So what I'd like you to do, they're all set up the same, is kind of read through the charts and graphs that show up. I will log in and share out these results. Maybe I'll do that afterwards. You should be able to read most of them. There's a few here where it gets down to like one unique answer. Remember, we're looking for patterns and trends. Going back to that with the electronic will be helpful, but for today's purpose, we're just looking for overall patterns. Because their words do matter. However, the comments should have printed all out, if I did it right. You should have extensive comments, so I gave you highlighters. And I really scan them looking for like, what are some of the patterns that you're seeing that people are saying, if we do this, I would want this, or don't do this because of this, and see if you can notice sort of any patterns or trends or in the feedback. And it's sort of set up that way all the way through. So we'll spend 20 minutes, I think we're gonna need it to really kind of at least do the initial scan. I'd like to ask each of you to report out with the themes, like the patterns and themes, not obviously all the small detail. And we'll see if anything kind of resonates across the group from that and have a discussion about next steps. Okay, and I will read too. couple minutes. Are we at a place where we can summarize? Is there anyone who wants to go first?
I will.
And you did the middle school students?
Yes.
I did too, but you go ahead.
All right. I would say I saw the same common themes throughout all of the questions, and the top three biggest areas of concern were ability to contact parents, to make plans or in case of an emergency. Checking the time was a really big one for the middle school students. And some of them even said they don't know how to use a clock, so I mean, maybe we should teach that. And there was a lot of concern around an increase in bullying if we took away the phones, that students might be more depressed, anxious, and angry, and may bully each other more.
Yeah, I saw that too. Concern about emergency, part of the connecting with parents
Yeah,
is
the
like,
emergency.
it was like, I don't feel well, I forgot something, or a crisis.
Yep.
How do I contact family if there's an emergency? That was a big thing. 37% of students say they use device during academic time. It's actually pretty high. There was a little bit of conversation about the right to have a phone, their right to have a phone. And while I don't disagree, I'm not sure in the academic classroom, do you feel that way, but that's what this is, well, that's what we're trying to understand. And one other thing I saw was really high was 65.3% of kids saying they're using earbuds. Most often during class, AirPods or earbuds. And then there's commentary about how some kids leave them in all day long and are not, they're listening to things all day long. And so that's a strategy, but it's also probably not allowing them to focus. Because our brains actually aren't wired that way to do two things at once like that, all day with new information. So that was striking to me. Anything else? Great, anyone else?
I'll just follow on that since I have the high school students. I'll kind of cover all of that. So the high school kids, like you said, we have 368 responses. 75% of them said they have cell phones and 55% said they have AirPods or earbuds that they're using. That was on the question, select the devices you most often use during class. Computers, personal computers or devices was much lower. It says cell phones and AirPods or earbuds. 90% of the high school students said they did not think that cell phones and smartwatches should be banned. 85% said it was either somewhat or very important for them to have access. 11% were neutral. 4% said it was not important. We had 18% of students say they never use them during class. 50% said 1 or 2 times, and the other 32% were 3 or more times, basically. With 3 to 5 being fairly common. Like your middle school kids, 82% said they use them to communicate, and I don't remember exactly what the whole thing said. Communicating with, I'm assuming it was family, right?
And friends.
Family and friends, and 70% said listening to music. And the biggest concerns were not being able to communicate with home. In the comments, the main threads that I pulled out were everything in the category of this is a waste of time, this is unnecessary, kids are gonna hate school even more. That was like a very common theme. Also, how do we communicate with home? What if there's an emergency? That kind of thing. A lot of kids, kind of the next tier of responses was it's okay. Like there was a tone of we'd like to be able to use them during lunch or free time, but it makes sense that they're not allowed in class. I wouldn't say that was a popular answer, but that was a thread. Also a similar thread, better enforcement of current policies. There were very few responses suggesting that there was any student support for fully banning them. There was a couple that said this is a good idea, but it was like very, very, very small amount. I think that's more or less what I pull out of that.
Thank you, Jared. Any questions? Thank you. Great, staff and families.
Staff, yeah. On the flip side, staff were very in favor of banning cell phones. 83.7% were either a 5 or a 4 on the scale of high for support banning. And then when they talked about negatively impacting focus and learning, 93.1% of teachers said it negatively impacts greatly or somewhat their focus and learning. For classroom management, it was 89.5% said there was a negative impact greatly or somewhat. As far as the threads, it was very common. There were only a few comments against, so it was like one said, some kids will just put it away when you ask, so it's not a big deal. 2 mentioned grade 6 specifically. It's not as big of a deal there. They don't have a lot of phones, but they are going to the bathrooms to use them if they do have them. So one teacher said with a good policy and enforcement in your classroom, it shouldn't be an issue and you shouldn't need a school-wide ban. One said it was a good tool for certain students. And then someone said smartwatches and AirPods are more of an issue than phones. And then one person said it was hard for parents. There were no common threads because there weren't many comments, but those were the ones that seemed against it. The ones for it, it was very common. It's not just distracting for the kids with the phone, it's distracting for the kids around them as well. Once there's a vibration or alert on a phone, the entire class can be disrupted, the entire lesson can be thrown off. There's drama, taking photos without permission, posting them. There's cheating, planning meetups, social media. There seems to be a fear of missing out the minute they hear it. That's more important than anything going on in the classroom, and they can't focus on anything else. They're seeing less socialization and reading happening in downtime and in study halls, creating it harder to learn, wasted study hall time, and that sometimes in class, students are feeling entitled and that their phone is a higher priority than learning. And there was an overarching theme that acknowledged that it's addicting. We know it's addicting. It's not just the teens it's addicting for, it's humans. But that we should take the step to help them to separate during school hours like they'll have to with a job. And then also we're impeding normal in-person relationship forming time if they're always on their phone, and it just becomes stressful for everyone. And then when we got to reasons they use phones, it was listed as texting or messaging, playing games, social media, cheating, and then taking photos and videos were the top ones. And the only new comment in there was that using music with an earbud is distracting and never allows them to fully focus in class. Negative for student engagement, peer relationships, social interactions, and classroom behavior were all in the 73% to 85% range. Like thinking that it had negative impact. And the neutral in there filled up the gap. So there's very, very minuscule positive or no positive for those. The biggest challenges most we're seeing would be resistance from students, lack of parental support. Teachers don't want to add another fight in their day. They want consistency. They don't want it put completely on them. They don't want it to be added work for them. How do you think it will impact student performance, classroom management, school climate? Overwhelmingly said it would improve it for all of them. How often do you use cell phones for educational purposes in your classroom? Never or rarely was about 70%. And then how often do you use your own cell phone or smartwatch during the instructional day? About 50% were never or rarely. And the comments on that were, I use it to connect with admin or teachers via email when I'm not at my computer. It's used during my prep period or during my lunch period. And an enforcement of such ban might be painful at first, but once everyone gets used to it, I think it would be not an issue anymore. And then just again on that theme of not adding more to the teachers, I hope the phones will be housed in the office so it's not my added responsibility to enforce it. That's kind of the gist of it all.
Thank you, Frida. Any questions for Frida? Great. Hey, Kristen.
So I had the grade 6 to 12 families. So 108 of the responses were from middle school families and 132 were from high school. It was fairly split down the middle. The first question just about, do you oppose a ban? With about 40% on each side, with a little bit in the middle, unsure. There were some comments requesting a clarification of what ban means and what school day looks like. So that was common themes in the comments was, are we talking just during classroom time or are we talking throughout the day, which is a reasonable question for sure. And then does ban mean they're being confiscated and taken away in the office? Does that mean they're going to be living in the classroom or in backpacks? Kind of lots of questions about like clarifying type questions. In terms of importance, again, we have 25% at 1, 25% at 5 in terms of importance, and then like a smattering in the middle. And the biggest, overwhelmingly, 77% said it's that emergency communication. There's a lot of concern about active threats, lock-ins, shooters, gun violence, that sort of thing, and wanting to have immediate and direct contact with their child versus having to kind of go through the school process or get the text alert. people saying they're often getting messages from students prior to getting the text alerts or able to clarify once that alert comes in. Others feel like, you know, the child is there under the responsibility of the school and the teachers, and they're 100% opposed to having a phone. It's the responsibility of the school and teachers to keep kids safe during that time. So comments kind of, we're pretty clear, like on either end of that spectrum, one way or another. And then lots of questions about in the middle, like, is there a compromise? You know, having the phones in a basket in the classroom so that they're not on their person, but if there's an emergency, they can access them, or off in the backpack. So that was one. The emergency was certainly the biggest one. There were a few concerns about medical issues and monitoring and that sort of thing, which I think would be in a separate basket if there was a true medical issue we talked about that needed that technology.
Like diabetes, I saw that in
Yes,
the
yes,
student
yeah.
one too. We have a few kids with diabetes that have that monitor that's on their phone.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the other 32% kind of big category was that ease of planning and scheduling, that things live on social media in terms of planning and scheduling. And if they're not on the phone, then they don't know that practice has been changed or something. You know, the schedules are not even given in paper form or hung on the refrigerator like they used to be. And ease of, you know, I have to text one kid to pick up the other one because something changed. So lots of concerns about like managing schedules if phones were gone for the duration of the day. And the expectation that all of those calls would go through the office wasn't necessarily going to work out. And there was a comment about at certain times during the day, the intercom not being accessible, like if there's an assembly or something going on, they can't do overhead. So what would be the plan in that instance? People have said they've actually been told to directly contact their child during certain times. So just things that would need to be worked out before that would be able to be in place. You know, smaller percentages in terms of like feeling disconnected from either the parent or the child side. There were a few comments about, you know, anxiety or the child being able to contact just to sort of get calmed down or get reassurance during the day. But I would say overwhelmingly the violence and threats on one end, and then absolutely no concern, it should have happened a long time ago, take them away on the other end. And then there's some in the middle asking for clarification about like, what is a ban, or could it be in the classroom? But there was a lot of language around like teaching versus punishing, this idea that we need to, you know, teach responsible use. There's some comments about, you know, banning them for every student versus just students that it's a problem with, or, you know, if you're an honor student with good grades and it's not an issue, then why are we kind of this like across the board versus more individualized? Acknowledging that it's putting more on the teachers to kind of have it be a case by case basis. I would say that's the general gist. Pretty, I would say it's more split, it sounds like, versus this one is more right down the middle,
Yeah,
it
the
feels like.
student, middle school's a little bit more even ground, but high school clearly no. Staff clearly yes, families right down the middle.
The good news is we probably confirmed what we would have guessed the results of our surveys would be.
I think that's important though, because rather than assuming it, at least we have some information and we have a little more clarity, and there's some good questions being raised. So what does that mean? I'm just checking the time. What's our next step? It seems like in reviewing all stakeholder groups, there's no unifying theme, which we anticipated, but it's important to consider. There are some real I mean, passionate, but also important statements that people are making about they've gotten very used to having access to communicate, to check on wellness, to schedule, and in case of emergency. We have some available workarounds for in case of emergency, although I'm not sure emotionally that's what families would feel is the workaround they're looking for. So I guess what else do we need to know? What information would be helpful for us as a team? And we'll make sure the other members have time to review this data as well.
So I know we have looked at information from other schools that have done bans, and I'm sure that these were similar concerns brought up by their communities. So how have they addressed these concerns in other schools? Because I know one of the things that we've talked about is that every school that has done a ban, none of them have regretted it. Right, so they had to have found a way to resolve these issues.
So we could pull out some of these common themes and concerns and name them. We could reach out to RSU1, we could reach out to Augusta Coney just this year, put in a much more strict ban. I don't even think it started at the beginning of the year. I think it went into full effect partway through the year. So they're right next door, although it's fairly fresh. And then you said you looked at Marana Cook.
Mhm.
Pony's just a little more our size, but maybe we could get a few people to zoom in and have a conversation with us. Or come if they're nearby and just have even a representative to have a conversation with us about what were your lessons learned after doing it? What would you wish you knew before you did something like this? Maybe there's some compromise that we could learn from that experience. How are you feeling?
I think I know we tried to keep it general, but I'm a questions person too, so I can see as a parent doing this and having lots of questions
Mhm.
about sort of the specifics. It's hard to make a decision when you don't feel like you have all of the information and you're
Sure.
not necessarily included in all of the behind the scenes. So I think I can appreciate feeling like, oh, I don't wanna say I support a ban when I don't really know what that looks like. I can appreciate that for sure. So perhaps having some clarity or some options to discuss more thoroughly would be helpful and sort of maybe coming to some common ground. Or at least putting it on the table.
So, feedback from people about what they wish they knew before they started. And, pathways they might have taken to do it. Would they do it the same way or would they do it differently or not at all? To
And
be
what
fair.
are their policies? I don't know. Like the Coney and did we
We have those, so we can pull the specific policies out.
revisit what those specifically look like?
Yep. And then also in doing that, maybe list like, here's a total ban, here's a ban during academic times with devices located X or Y. Cause that was a lot of it. It was like, do they never get to check their phone? Does someone else control the access to their phone, or do they have control of the access to their phone? Can they regulate themselves with that or not? Which is where a lot of the staff weighed into, been nervous around that.
I know it's a lot of work. When you put together these surveys, and I know there's a concern around fatigue, but I do think that an appropriate step somewhere before we reach a final decision of what we do or don't choose to recommend to the board is exactly that, kind of having a couple of different scenarios and asking the same stakeholder groups, like, which of these could you live with?
Yeah, just simple,
You know,
but like clear. questions answered.
And right, everything from that wall-to-wall ban during school hours to maybe a student controlled, not during class, school side controlled, not during class, or a keeping the policy as is kind of thing, but having to do the work on what those different parameters would actually look like. And I do think potentially if we're doing that, there is value in hearing from some folks from the other districts about, what they learned or what they would, how they arrived at a place where things are going smoothly now. I do think that's a good idea, but I think the getting feedback from the people in this district on that first part is probably, for me, priority over hearing how other people in other places kind of were able to get people on board, if there was time to do one or the other.
So we could, take the notes that you just provided me, of course, we'll have access to the surveys, and try to pull some of the policies that we've gotten already from other places so that we can at least see, like, here's a total ban policy, here's our current policy, here's a couple other versions of policies. And try to get, as you said, 1 to 3 or 1 to 4 versions. And that lays out the options. So here's the policy, this is what it looks like in practice. Here's a policy, here's at least a summary statement of it. I don't know if we could get to every, like all the procedures in that session, nor would we maybe want to invest that much time. But we could do that for March, like policy A, B, C, D. And then this is kind of what it summarized, what it would look like in practice. And then, see what's clear to us and what's questionable to us based on the feedback from the surveys. And then maybe if we did that in March, winnow it down to what we feel like might be the next step. And then we can decide if we want to get feedback right away or if we want to hear from some other schools that might help us fine tune that and then get feedback in April from families.
I think it's also important that we know what's realistically available to us. Like,
Yeah.
are the pouches an option? Are they not? Because that clears up right there. Are we talking about teacher or office control or student control, or is there that alternative option?
That's really fair. And the pouches are very expensive, so I'm not sure that's gonna be realistic for us, but unless
You don't
there's a
wanna present
grant.
something that's then not an option.
Yeah, not an
That makes
option.
sense.
yeah,
If everyone's like, yes, get the pouches.
Right,
Right.
and we're like,
Just
"Oh."
kidding, pick a different one.
yeah, and that wouldn't be fair
Yeah.
to anyone.
It would be interesting to see if the numbers shift slightly though, with a bit more clarification or some in between,
Specificity.
yeah.
Yeah, for sure, cause you can then picture it instead of like your imagination of what this could be. Okay, so that's what we'll do for the next step. We'll prepare policy, draft policy language from other systems. It won't be like, we're not the policy committee, so we are not drafting policy for the board to approve. We are drafting policy so that we can see what does policy look like with a certain type of practice. And then how does that compare to our feedback? Is it clear? Does it help provide clarity of purpose and process? Do we want feedback from the community then on those specific, and if so, which ones?
I'm just wondering too, if it would be helpful to, and I'm not clear on what the emergency procedure is. I mean, I know as a parent, I get the text, but it sounded like from every group, one of the overwhelming things is this emergency situation.
Sure, that's a good idea.
Just what, being transparent about what that current policy is and what that would look like, I think may help. Like I said, I know I get texts, but other than that, and I'm in elementary, so where I'm not in the high school, so I don't know if it's different, if it's the same.
So we might even be able to, so I can pull that easily. And we might want to have our SRO or Gardner PD join us just to, from their perspective, to get a little feedback about, because they've experienced that, both the school resource officers, other agencies, our Gardner Police Department, to get their to be able to ask questions that we might have.
Because there were a few comments about like having students in the school seeing it and being able to track where they were saying this from was actually helpful to law enforcement in those situations, which I don't know if that is accurate from their perspective or not. Like, is lots of people calling 911 all at once helpful, or is it actually easier when, so, you know?
I'll let them answer that.
I can tell you in my experience, it's not as helpful. I was a 911 dispatcher for 13
Oh,
years, and it was
yeah.
not as, when you have like hundreds of calls ringing in, it's an overwhelming thing in there, and a lot of times there's the same or no new information being added. Just, I heard this is happening, or someone said, but nothing really adding in. And that can really slow everything down.
Yeah, and we unfortunately, I mean, I understand where the families are coming from. We've had some experiences that they're drawing from, for sure. Okay, so we have a few next steps. They feel like they're concrete enough? We're making progress, at least in understanding and trying to be conscientious of all the parties involved.
Yes.
Thank you for coming and taking the time to go through this. I'll put everything in the folder so everyone has access. I'll type these up. And we will meet on. I gotta look at my calendar because I didn't write it down ahead of time.
March 10th.
Thank you, March 10th. Oh, that's right, February, March tend to have the same dates. So March 10th at 3 o'clock. All right, I'll do some homework and get us prepared. Thank you so much. We are adjourned.
Danielle, you want to see it?
Yeah, I can take them.